Hello, it's Jean and I'm back. I'm going to cut some vintage paper. It's something that we use as journalists quite a lot, but vintage papers are very often fragile, different textures and things. So through trial and error, the mat to use is the low. On the high tack, the chance of you leaving text behind is quite high. So I'm going to pull off this protective sheet. You can hear, even though it's low tack, there is a specific tack. I'm positioning the workpiece once again, and as always, I brayer my workpieces. And just make sure that you get a nice even attachment. And I brayer left to right, top to bottom, and diagonally, and take care that you get the corners. And then a mat loading. I have found that the beige, the brown blade, which is actually the fabric blade, works well on the vintage paper. That's something, I know, doily-ish. Sometimes these designs are, you have to press forward, backwards quite a few times. But the doilies are with the little fairy picture. Doilies are quite intricate and quite tricky sometimes, so that's why it's a nice exhibition piece. And then also doilies feature quite prominently in junk journals and vintage junk journals in particular. I'm sometimes overwhelmed. It's 10 by 10, which will be fine there. And then you can also see on the screen where it sits. I'm going to show a test cut. So on the screen, I just want to see how to zoom in. I don't actually know. On the screen there's a little button above the start that says test, and it gives you a tiny little triangle of where it's going to test. Now you can move the test button so that you don't waste paper, that you rather just test it almost where you're going to cut, and then that shows you how your blade is doing. So here it does its depth testing, and again, and then it's going to do a tiny little triangle cut, and then so there it is. It's a nice clean cut. There's no tearing of the paper. And then you can, I've got a little weeding hook. You can lift it out, but I'm just looking at it and lifting up the paper, and it's a nice clean cut. The machine gives you a test again button. So if you didn't like that test, if you want to test again, you press test again, and you start looking at the little spanner, and that then gives you cut speed at the moment was at 2 and cut pressure was at auto, and then that's where you can start playing. So if it was tearing, for example, reduce your speed. If it wasn't cutting through, reduce your pressure, for example. So that is why test cuts are so important, specifically if you're cutting new materials for the first time. So this is the first time for me actually cutting a doily on this particular vintage paper. Also, every set of vintage books that I find are different. So I'm going to give it a go and say start. I've done my test cut, and then we can see how it goes. Cut with any of the thinner papers, it's absolutely critical, as always, that your workpiece is stuck down. So the low tack, I like using vintage papers and vellums. Vellums do well on the low tack. So that's the machine done. You'll see that I positioned it right on the edge, so I was lucky. And just fold that over, and then again rolling. You'll see there's some jagged edges there. That was the end of the page because I didn't check where I positioned my workpiece. Vintage paper is very fragile, and removing a cut, just be patient. Sometimes the mirror is so beautiful, it remains. So that is a vintage paper doily, but for that, which was where we hit the end of the paper, so that again is my fault, not the machine's fault. Beautiful cuts. There's no jagged edges, there's no catching of the paper, there's no tearing. So that is the benefit of matching your mat and your item together. So what I'm going to do, just to illustrate, is I'm brayering this again. I'm not even clearing where I've cut. Something that often gets sort of underestimated on these machines are also the scanning function. They've got a very, very good scanning function. Oops, I'm going to load the mat again. I'm going to do the same cut with the black blade, which is the one that I've now put away. So again, make sure that it's properly situated. So what I can do now with the scanning function is to say, there's a middle button on the machine which scans the mat, so it shows you where your material is and where you can cut. So it's very good for using scrap papers. So the design that I have on screen, I can move across to cut in a different spot. So you can see there, I can see my book page now, but that is a design, and I want to move it. So this time I can be sure that I'm cutting it right over the text. And then we can cut again. This is now cutting with the black blade. So same pressure, it's on a -1 pressure because it's a very thin paper, and it's on 2-speed, which is, so the speed was automatically determined by the machine. I changed the pressure. So let's see what a different blade does on the same material. Compare the brown blade, the beige blade, clean. This has got, it's torn up the paper, it has lifted. I'm going to see if I can even get a clean, usable design. This is an instance where I cannot blame the machine. I made bad choices for the material. The blade was wrong. The machine didn't cut too deeply, the machine cut the pattern. But the tool I gave the machine wasn't up to the job. So that's the one. There's tearing, paper's broken, the cuts aren't clean. And there's the other one. So that is why test cuts are very important. That is why practicing different things with different blade and mat combinations are very important. What I'm going to see now is whether I can cut the same design on the same paper but change some settings. What you need to do is, this blade now has debris in because it was a bad cut. So this is where it comes in to clean the housing. Be very careful, that blade is, but the housing, give it a shake. And that's always a troubleshooting that you need to do. Check your blade, that it's properly situated. Check your mat, that everything is sticking. Check that your blade doesn't have debris, and check that you're using the correct blade. So let's go again. Reloading. Same blade that we know wasn't a good blade. We are scanning the mat again so that it can tell us where to put the design. And then we're going to start editing. I don't think it's the pressure, I think it's the speed on this one. And then it's also okay to come to the realization that actually this now has very little to stick on, and remember this is a low tack mat. So you can now see clearly that that's where our first cut was, that's where our second cut was. And whoops. So that one we want to move. It can just move straight down, and it'll still fit in. This also helps you now to make the most of your paper. We're hitting the spanner. Sorry, we're cutting. We're hitting the spanner. The speed, I'm reducing the speed by 1, okay. And let's see, let's do the pressure by 1, 2. And then we can do a test cut. And again, it now shows you your mat, so you know to do your test cut where you haven't cut before. So the scanning function and being able to scan the mat to see, also if, for example, you're putting a tag on a pattern paper, that you can position the tag correctly. Even with the reduced speed, this is not a good test cut. So that clearly tells you, I'm not going to waste my time cutting a whole doily, this is the wrong blade for vintage paper. And that is how you start troubleshooting your blades and your materials. Test cut, and I mean you can do 50 test cuts all along the edge here, and that's how you get an answer. Whereas with the brown blade, which is the thin fabric blade, works perfectly well for thin papers, thin and fragile papers. So and the test cut showed that, because immediately the test cut was clean, whereas here the test cut is not clean. So that is the takeaway on vintage papers. The machine can absolutely cut it. It sticks well on the low tack mat, but use the correct blade. What I want to show you, I've lifted off. Do you see the text and the little bits? So that's not sticky anymore because there's now paper filaments in it. So as your first step to rehabilitate or care for your mat would be the baby wipe. And it's I'm not scrubbing, it's a light rub. And that generally lifts off most of the things that you don't want. The baby wipe comes back with stuff on. And then if that doesn't work, go for the soaking. So really take care of your mats, and your mats will give you good cuts. That is the thing with vintage paper, is that it will leave debris. Interestingly enough, where I used the correct blade, it's far less messy than on the one where the blade was incorrect. So that again shows you that it's an automated machine, but you are still the brain pushing the buttons. Next up for me is I'm cutting some wallpaper. The wallpaper has filaments in. I think you can see that. So if you tear it, it's a layered textured paper. It's got a glossy side. It doesn't actually say what it's made of. And then it's obviously thicker than normal paper, so let's see how the machine handles the fibers. I am once again brayering my material on. This is the ScanNCut purple mat because of the fibers and the thickness. The low-tech mat won't handle it, and I'm going with the black blade, the standard general cut blade. For ease and for reference, I'm cutting the exact same doily again, so that you can see the same design can be cut on numerous materials. I am doing my test cut, but first I'm scanning my mat to see my positions. So that shows the mat. The test cut can be moved. And then the next thing is I had changed the settings. The cut speed wasn't too whoopsie, and the cut pressure is on auto. So let's do a test cut. It is a minute. That cut through, it cut nice and steady. I'm just looking at the actual piece, which I've now lost. Look at your little test triangles, and that can tell you how the cut went. So my speed is fine, there's no jagged edges, and the depth's fine, it's cut through. I did not check where this thing is even positioned. Can you believe that? So there we go, that's the pause button that I showed you. So now there's my paper, it's positioned correctly, it's in this corner, that's fine. Let's go. I'm cutting, I'm not drawing. All of the cut designs can be drawn too, so you could draw a doily if you had put your pen in, and it works exactly the same way. There's no extra detail required from you. So that's done. I'm going to lift off again. It looks okay. Let's unload. There's a little bit of blade like lifts on the inside on the turns, but that is not, it's not on the workpiece, it's on the cut bit. So I'm going to lift this off. I'm happy with that. It's a nice clean cut. My machine has not been calibrated, but looking at, as I said, it's far over a year, but looking at, there's a tiny disconnect between the one cut and the next, and that's a calibration issue. So that's machine maintenance. It's not something that I've noticed before. So also just look at your machine. The machine also gives clues and you start understanding. But in terms of cleanness of cut, it handled the filament paper very well. I don't actually think we need to do it with the brown blade because the black blade obviously does what it needs to do. And then you can see the, where am I? There's some sun coming in. The negative is also very clean. There's really very few, like one or two jagged edges. So that tells you, like the test cut indicated, that the material is correctly placed, the blade is right, the cutting depth is right, and the speed is right. So that is just pressing and playing. The next item that I'm going to cut is cork. It's a fabric backed cork, or it's got like a lining almost, and it's a printed cork because it's an A4 sheet. Again, standard tack mat, because the low tack won't have enough to keep those filaments, and it's a thicker material. Again, you get sick of me braying, take care on the corners. This, by the way, is the mat that I retacked with a zig in the other video, and I must say the zig is beautiful. Okay, loading our mat with our cork, again on the black blade. So this is general, it's really the general cutting blade. Very few items it doesn't do well with. I'm going to scan the mat so that you can see where to position your design. So that shows it's you, that's fine. We are cutting, and then we need to edit, so that's where the design is now. I'm just trying to see that I get a sort of nice bit of the foliage and things in. That's fine. And now we are also testing. Again, test cut. It really costs nothing to do a test cut. It's so tiny, but it saves you material, and it saves your time, and it saves your sanity. Okay. Sorry, I've got some Do you see that there's a tiny little bit that it didn't cut? So whilst it did okay, it could do with some more pressure. So it's okay, it's 99%, but I'm going to test again. This just needs to move on a bit. Okay, and I'm going to do the pressure +1. It doesn't need to be a lot, right? And then just to be sure, you can scan the mat again to make sure that your test isn't in the triangle that you've already tested. And I know we are crafters, yeah, see, so it's moved on a little bit, so that's fine. We are crafters, and we do get in a hurry, and we do want to get stuff done, and you know, we only have so much time, and I don't want to be doing test cuts. But in the long run, still not okay, getting better. We're testing again. And we are doing the cut pressure to 2. And this is where, if you had left it on automatic, you would have gotten an okay cut. You probably would have gotten a good enough cut with 1 or 2 snips to do. But on an intricate thing, and like this cork I don't have a lot of, I don't want to get an okay cut. That's even worse, and that's right on the edge. So that tells me my material wasn't sticking. There was a bulge. So this is what you learn from test cuts, that your material is correctly placed, that the blade is correctly placed and clean, not clean. Okay, even though I cleaned it after the vintage paper, obviously some more bits dropped out. That's correctly seated now. Okay, we're doing a test cut again. And we're going to pressure 3. This is I can say abnormal. This is a slightly less, and I'm doing this right in the corner, so the chances of this lifting So this is what test cuts show you, and this seems tedious, but it's the first time that I'm cutting an intricate. I've done tags and things but not a circular design. So let's see. Perfect. So third time. So I mean, it took a little bit. There's no filaments left over. The cut was well. The blade is clean, and we can start. let's see what we've got. I don't think this is by far, you can tell by the fluffy is generally the cleanest cut or the best cut that I've done. But sometimes certain designs just aren't well suited to certain materials. So lift this off. I mean, these are this is the type of thing you would make earrings with. I'm just giving it like a finger knock to get all the loose bits out. Just be careful with these loose bits, you don't want them in your machine. That is pretty good actually. I missed one little bit, which again, I didn't tear the material, I didn't miss the material, it's just and these are very, very tiny cuts. You'll see that is where I didn't position it, so the test cut was there wasn't actually material for it to cut, so it's not a machine fault. These are not jagged edges. I'm looking at these tiny, tiny, tiny interior diamonds, and that needs a snip, but literally it's one little fiber that it didn't get. I'm very happy with that actually. I think that was quite a test for the machine, very neat. So we've got the same wallpaper, cork and vintage paper so far, and they all give very. The next material that I'm going to use is a plastic. It's placemats, and what I like about them, they're cheap. 10 Rand. This is a PEP one. You can see it's like a thickish plastic, and I use these to cut stencils, so they're quite big, and you can cut them to size. So we're going to have a look to cut some stencils. So this is the placemat. This is on a purple mat. You will notice from the color that it is a different mat. It is one that I have retacked, and that I have retacked good and proper with the green Tombow. There is a video on that. It's high tack, super tacky. It'll tear paper, but for anything else it's very good. And it's just another way of making my machine work for me, because I do cut thicker materials, I do cut leather, I do like cutting sort of junk journally fabric, so it doesn't need to be precise clean cuts like you would for quilting, and then I can cut it without backing or anything. So I'm going to use this for stencils again in the Brother standard designs. There are standard stencils, and this works well, so it's just choosing one. Do the rose perhaps, some frames. There's a nice teapot. That's my big problem is I can never make up my mind. Do a circle. I'm going to go ahead and scan my mat so that I know where the position is. Here obviously I don't care about the design and where it places, it's just the material and the fact that it's cheap and readily available for me to cut stencils. This mat of mine, I must say, this is a bit too big, so I'm just making it smaller, resizing it to fit, and then also just positioning it so that it sits on the mat. That will work. Let's cut. I'm going to do a test cut. Test cut there will be fine. This, of course, is now one of the thicker materials. Did you see what it did? It does a double pass because it knows it's a thicker material. I didn't tell it, so it cuts and it cuts again. So keep, that's also a function, and then it does a perfectly clean cut. So it's something that it knows by itself. This is a long cut. This is a 17-minute cut because it does a double pass because of the thicker material. So that's done. It was quite a long cut because it does the did the double take, and then this is a super sticky mat, so you will hear it. Whoops. I'm doing what I tell you not to do, and then again just knocking out all the bits and pieces. This mat of mine is a temperamental mat. It had trouble loading and it got some damage on the edge. So you'll see even now it loads skew. So I use it, I'm using it basically until I can't anymore. So sometimes the cuts on it are good, and sometimes the cuts on it are so-so. So what you'll see here is the cut, but they just need a little bit of a persuasion. If I had cut it on my other purple mat, it would have cut perfectly because the mat's good, but I would have had to tape it down. So you know what you're comfortable with, you know what you want your machine to do, you know what your applications are. So if you're doing cards and things, maybe you'd rather have a spare mat. For me as a journaler, this system works fine. So there we go. That's now obviously the placemat side, but the placemat's all white at the back, so beautiful stencil. I've just cut it, and even with me having to knock out some of the circles, they're all very clean cut. And I mean, those little circles in the middle on something that's thick, I mean, you know what the placemats are made of. And then because it's nice and thick and sturdy, no, my cardstock sticking to my hat. This takes texture paste very well. So for me as a journaler, wanting something very quickly and something for a theme journal, I love that my brother can do it. So that's it for now. I hope you learned some tricks and some tips, and that you won't be scared to use your machine. As I said, even with a wonky mat and not feeding properly, I've sliced edges off this mat and it's still going. I've retacked it, I've stripped it, and this is still the same blades I got issued with, and I learn something new on my machine every day. I play more and more on my machine every day, and I'm having fun. Thanks for watching. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to my channel at Secretary. We do lots of videos on brother items, and also on journaling and paper craft in general. Bye-bye.